A lot of it begins, obviously, when you're out there hunting, to think of your shot before you pull the trigger. And I say that because it depends on what you want to do with that turkey, as far as if you want to mount it, full mount, tail mount, whatever it might be. And I say that because a lot of it is, if you can, wait till that turkey picks his head up and is not in full strut. And the reason why I say that is because if you have him in full strut, usually will somehow somebody breaks feathers on the tail, it could mess up all the feathers in the front of the bird. And it's a lot easier, if you have to replace the head on a bird if you hit too hard or whatever, compared to feathers. They're a lot harder to replace. There's just so many feathers on a bird like that. So that's a big thing. If you can think about that before you pull the trigger, what you want to do with that bird, hopefully. After the shot, the big thing about a turkey is, if you can, let's say they're flopping around or something, try to stop them from doing that. Obviously, you know, stay on them or whatever you have to do, because I've seen a lot of turkeys that were shot are in great shape and they flop around enough where they lose half their feathers or a lot of their feathers. And after that, the biggest thing to do, the same thing, is to think of what you want to do. Maybe let's say even before you pull the trigger. And I say that because if it's a full mount, for example, the best bet is to either take it right to the taxidermist and let them skin it, don't gut it or anything, or freeze it solid. And then he can thaw it out and skin it the way he needs to. Half mount is the same way. You want to make sure the taxidermist does the skinning on that bird. You don't do that yourself. If it is a tail mount, something like that, or tail and a wing mount, you can obviously gut the bird yourself, things like that, dress it out yourself, and then take it to the taxidermist so then they can take those off yourself. Or if you're an experienced hunter, I'm sure you could probably take the tail off yourself, the beard off, and then the legs, and give those to the taxidermist to make a mount out of them. So it allows us thinking of what you want to do before you pull the trigger. It helps out a lot, you know. I've had some guys that will shoot a bird, for example, let it flop around, show all their buddies for a long time, not gut it out, and it gets here and it's in pretty bad shape. So try not to do that, obviously. There's a lot of options. I do everything, guys, I have everything from a basic tail mount to a tail with wings. I've done what they call turkey rugs. And actually that's where you have the full tail and then all the rest of the feathers all the way down to the back of the head, or the neck. It's beautiful. You can do what they call a half mount, just the whole front half of the bird, and it comes on a plaque. And then you obviously have the full mounts. A lot of guys are now asking their turkeys to be made into a decoy. And again, it's definitely an option that you can do, and use obviously your feathers and head and everything else of that bird to make it into a decoy. And obviously, from the taxidermist's point of view, you just don't make them quite as detailed as you would a show type mount or whatever. But yeah, it's interesting because I've done this myself the past 3 or 4 years. I had a full strut turkey that I did just for hunting purposes, and I've had a lot of great success. Today we're talking turkey tails. A lot of supplies that I use or other taxidermists use, you have around your house or at the local grocery store. I use a sharp blade, a scalpel blade is what I use, but you can use a knife. I use T-pins or some kind of pin to pin out the tail where you want it to be. I'll also use cardboard to lay out the tail so it stays in place. I use also some wire cutters, and I use those again to clip off any little bones or the ends of the feathers, so they also are really clean. Also at the very end, I use 20 mule team borax, and what that does is basically a bug proofing and helps to dry up any fat or anything might be on that, and preserves the ends of the feathers. And now we're on to the tail. Make sure, again, like I said, because as many feathers along with the tails, because we can always remove the feathers we don't need, but if we don't have enough, it's hard to replace. So the big thing is to, again, leave as many feathers as you can with that tail. And then we can also, you know, like I said, remove them down the road. What I do first is I take and I lay the tail face down, and then I take and pull all these feathers, the back feathers that are not needed, basically, and then I trim as close to the large tail feathers as I can. And you'll see the roots of the large tail feathers right there. And then what I do is just take wire cutters and clip off that bone. There's a bone down there, and remove the unwanted feathers. Then you can discard those feathers or leave them for another project. And now you have the excess feathers that you don't need from the back of the tail. Then you flip the tail over and you work on the front side. And the main thing here you need to do is just remove as much meat and fat, that unwanted fat that you don't need, that could turn into problems down the road. So the biggest thing is to carve away this. And again, I'm pulling back on these feathers so I don't cut them, because you want those on your tail mount. Oh, yeah, and I work along the quills here of the feathers. Again, you have to remove every bit of meat and fat here. Let me remove this bone here. And discard that meat, obviously. I'm trying to get every single little piece of fat or meat out of this. Two reasons. One main reason, you don't want it, again, to smell. The second would be the worst case, we'd have bugs that would eat away at the feathers, and then you would have a mess. So basically, again, I worked real hard to have it as clean as possible. There's no fat, no meat. And also if you look here, there's in between this set of feathers and this track of feathers, there's probably a good 1.5 or 2 inches of a gap in between them underneath. You also want to separate that area. And the reason why is the same thing. You don't want bugs to get in there. So if you can separate that and clean it out real well and get borax in there, then you won't have a problem down the road. If done right and cleaned up right, this will last forever. And make sure that the main thing too is to make sure that when you do this, you work on both sides. Both sides need to be very clean. And that's pretty good. We'll work a little bit more on this yet on the front side, but then you need to flip it over and make sure you do the back side. As you can see, there's still a lot of fat and meat left that needs to be removed. Okay, now that we have the tail area all cleaned up as much as it needed to be cleaned, I really put a lot of this borax on. Again, like I said, what this does, it dries it up, and it's a bug proofing also, and works really good. The main thing is to make sure you work into every little crevice of this tail that you possibly can, so you've covered all areas of this. Okay, and then make sure you do the same thing on the other side. Work it in there as much as you can, so again, it does a really good job of preserving and drying everything up on this as much as possible. Okay, once you've got it totally covered with borax and you're satisfied with how much is on there, I think it's covered very well, then you're ready to put it together on the board. So at this point, you just remove that. And I put a piece of, I said board, put a piece of styrofoam down. And I cut this little window out, and I just do that so I have a little more room to work with here and keep things in line. Plus then at that point, once it is dry, then I can put the hot glue with the Bondo on this, and I won't touch the foam. At this point, I pretty much just go through and put the feathers where they need to be, and luckily the tail kind of lays itself out to a certain point. But main thing is, and that's also why I have this cut straight, so you can either have the bottom flat or you can have it curled up a little bit. But I don't want to actually go inside the middle of this feather, just on the edge, because you don't want to pierce that. And I just put it on the top and hold the feather in place. And as you can see on these tail feathers, you just basically start at the bottom, start at the top. They just lay right on top of each other just to make them uniform. And if you have an issue where, let's say you're missing a feather, or if a feather got shot off, you can easily fix that on most turkey tails. And the way of doing that is, let's just say we had one missing here. It'd be very simple to just take the next feather and bring it down. Listen, if this one was missing, you could bring this next feather down and replace that. Now you might have to bring this whole tail back together a little more to do that, but you could definitely replace that missing feather very easily by just taking the next feather above that and bringing it down in place. After you do the main feathers, have them where you're happy with, and they all look uniform, let's go work on your secondary feathers. And it's the next row of feathers that comes from the main feathers. And they're basically the same thing. You just want to make sure everything is uniform and naturally sits the way it needs to. Okay, once you get the feathers laid out the way you like, and if you're happy how every feather is sitting, what I do at that point is take 2 strips of cardboard that I cut off a box and lay them down in an A-shaped, basically. And this will hold everything in place while it dries. And then basically T-pin each one into place. And this way it will not move as it dries. Now we got the tail the way we want it to be. It's all pinned. It got cardboard on it. It's ready to be dried. Then I go on to the tail. I'm sorry, I go on to the beard. What I do with the beard, I just put one pin at the very end. You don't have to, but I put one pin there. And I pin it along the whole beard. And the reason why I do that is sometimes beard will get a real large crook in them or a real large bend. And so I'd rather pin them in place so as they dry, it stays straight. Once I have everything pretty much ready, then I take the leg with the spur and I'll pin it to the styrofoam, both spurs, so everything's all in one place. And then what I do, I'll put obviously the person's name, or let's say this was my turkey. What I will do, I will take and I will pin a piece of cardboard here and maybe my license to it also. But I will put on there basically maybe the date, the time and everything about the hunt. So therefore, if I want to get a plaque made up, I'll personalize it with maybe how big the bird was as far as weight, beard size, spur size. It's all right on there. So this is all ready to go on a plaque whenever it's dried. I usually wait a good, let's say 2 weeks or so before I go any farther on this, because I want that to totally dry up and the tail to stay in place like it should. Then again, like I said, I either put Bondo or hot glue on there to keep the tail always in the same position. But then it's ready to put on a plaque. Okay, once your turkey tail is all dried and ready to be put on a plaque, this is how simple it really is. I pretty much center the tail on the plaque, and then I secure it with a piece of cardboard and 2 screws. It makes it very strong. You can also, if you want to, put glue in there or hot glue to make it a little stronger, but this seems to do a great job. As far as the beard, that's very simple. The beard is pretty much hot glued or glued right up in here. You just go up, say just to where the actual hairs of the beard are showing, and you center that also. And as far as the spurs are concerned, I just pretty much put them in a piece of leather and then either staple them or you can hot glue them or something to the back of the plaque. Then you're done with your mount and you have memories for a lifetime.